Officer Sarah Johnson cruised down the dimly lit street, her patrol car humming softly as the quiet of the night settled around her. The neon signs from nearby shops flickered, casting shadows across the pavement. She had been on her shift for hours now, and the calmness of the evening was a welcome change from the usual chaos of the city streets. She knew this neighborhood well. It wasn't the safest place, but tonight was different. The streets were unusually empty. There was something about the stillness that set her on edge. As she passed the corner store, she saw a car parked along the curb, the engine still running. Sarah slowed down her vehicle instinctively, her eyes narrowing. As she watched the car parked just a little too long at the corner, a woman sat behind the wheel, staring straight ahead, her hands resting on the steering wheel. The car wasn't moving, and the woman didn't appear to be in a hurry to go anywhere. Sarah's intuition told her something was off, so she decided to make the stop. She parked her cruiser a few feet away from the car and stepped out, walking towards the vehicle with deliberate steps. The woman didn't seem to notice her approach until Sarah was just a few feet away. Then the woman looked up, startled, her eyes wide, as if Sarah had caught her off guard. She seemed calm at first, but there was an air of tension surrounding her. Sarah observed the woman's face. She was black, young, probably in her early 30s, but there was something about her composure that made Sarah pause. It was as if the woman was used to being in control of situations, but tonight something was different. Sarah's instincts told her this was a routine traffic stop at first, but she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this moment than met the eye. The woman rolled down her window, slowly looking up at Sarah with an unreadable expression. "Good evening," Sarah said, keeping her voice firm. "Can I see your license and registration?" The woman glanced at her for a moment before reaching for the glove compartment. Without answering, she handed over the papers with a slight tilt of her head, as though the request was almost beneath her. But Sarah didn't let the subtle attitude slip by her hand. Gripping the papers, Sarah noticed how the woman didn't seem rushed to comply. She was taking her time, as if there was no urgency in the world. "Do you know why I stopped you?" Sarah asked, her voice steady. The woman paused for a moment before responding, her words calm, but with an undertone of something Sarah couldn't place. "I'm sure you have your reasons, officer, but I don't believe I've done anything wrong." The woman's tone was polite, almost too polite. Sarah could feel her heart rate picking up as the tension between them grew palpable. She wasn't sure why, but there was something in the woman's eyes, something that made Sarah uneasy, like the woman knew more than she was letting on. The silence between them stretched too long for comfort. Sarah's grip tightened on the papers as she scanned them quickly. She found no obvious violations, but there was something nagging in her. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this encounter. "Step out of the car, please," Sarah said, her voice taking on a sharper edge. This wasn't a request. The woman hesitated for a moment, but then she opened the door, slowly stepping out of the car. She stood a little taller than Sarah, with an air of quiet authority surrounding her. Sarah's pulse quickened as she watched the woman closely, feeling an inexplicable pull in her gut. There was something in the way the woman moved, something about her presence that made Sarah question everything she thought she knew about this situation. Lena stood still for a moment, her posture unflinching as she looked down at Sarah with calm eyes. There was no fear, no resistance, just an unsettling stillness that seemed to make the air around them heavier. Sarah felt her grip tighten on her baton instinctively as the silence stretched on, both women standing face to face. The quiet hum of the city seemed to fade into the background. The tension was palpable, like something was about to snap. Lena's cool demeanor only made Sarah more on edge, but she pushed the feeling aside. This was a routine stop, she told herself. It had to be. "Do you have any identification?" Sarah asked, her voice steady but her pulse quickening. The woman didn't respond immediately, instead taking a long, deliberate breath before reaching into her bag and pulling out her wallet. She handed Sarah a driver's license, her fingers brushing Sarah's briefly as she did so. Sarah didn't miss the way Lena's eyes flickered toward her hand, but she quickly averted her gaze, focusing on the license. The name on it was Lena Carter. For a moment, Sarah stared at the name, trying to place it. The name seemed vaguely familiar, but it didn't click. It was just another name, just another face in the crowd of the city she policed. She handed the license back, feeling an unfamiliar sense of unease she couldn't explain. "Everything seems in order," Sarah muttered, more to herself than to Lena. Lena didn't move, didn't say anything. She was too calm, too composed. It was as if nothing was wrong, as if they were standing on equal ground despite the obvious power dynamic between them. Sarah felt a prickle at the back of her neck, like a warning, but she ignored it, forcing herself to focus on the task at hand. "Do you know why I stopped you?" Sarah asked again, this time a little sharper. Lena tilted her head slightly, her lips curling into a thin smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "I imagine you have your reasons," Lena replied coolly, her voice smooth, almost like she was indulging Sarah's need for the question to be asked. There was something in her tone that didn't quite sit right with Sarah. It was too casual, too detached for someone in this situation. "Step out of the car," Sarah ordered, her voice firmer now. There was something about the way Lena was looking at her, that subtle, knowing gaze that unnerved her. Sarah knew she was on the edge of something, but she couldn't quite grasp what it was. It was as though Lena was playing a game, one that Sarah didn't even realize she was part of. Lena didn't resist. She opened the car door slowly and stepped out, her movements deliberate and measured. She stood tall, almost too tall for someone who was supposedly being detained. Sarah noticed the way she moved with grace, with confidence. It was a presence that couldn't be ignored, and for the first time, Sarah realized that Lena wasn't just another citizen she could control. There was something different about her. The two women stood facing each other now, the distance between them charged with unspoken tension. Sarah's mind raced as she tried to make sense of the situation, but every time she thought she had it figured out, the uncertainty crept back in. She had been trained to handle situations like this, trained to follow protocol. But Lena made everything feel complicated, like there was more at stake here than just a simple traffic stop. "Why did you resist?" Sarah asked, though it didn't sound like an accusation. It was more of a question she was asking herself. Lena didn't flinch. She simply tilted her head slightly, her eyes meeting Sarah's. "I didn't resist," Lena said softly, her voice steady. "You just didn't want to listen." Sarah froze, taken aback. It wasn't just the words. It was the way Lena said them, like she was stating a fact, something that Sarah hadn't even realized. The words lingered in the air, twisting around Sarah's mind as she tried to understand what had just happened. "I'm not resisting," Lena repeated, her eyes locked onto Sarah's with quiet intensity. "I'm simply waiting for you to make the right choice." The words hung in the air like an unspoken challenge, and Sarah could feel the weight of them pressing against her chest. Lena's steady gaze didn't waver, and for a moment, Sarah felt the ground beneath her shift. It was as if Lena had just peeled back a layer of something Sarah had never acknowledged, something buried deep in her own psyche. She shook off the strange feeling, trying to focus on the task at hand. "Step aside, please," Sarah said, her voice a little sharper now, more authoritative. She motioned toward the sidewalk, needing some distance, some space to regain control over the situation. But Lena stood her ground, her expression unreadable. There was no fear in her eyes, no panic, just calm, an unsettling calm. "You don't have to do this," Lena said again, her tone still measured, but this time there was an edge to it. "This doesn't have to go any further." Sarah hesitated. Her hand hovered over her radio, ready to call for backup, but something in Lena's voice held her back. She wanted to believe this was just another stop, that she was doing her job and following procedure. But Lena's presence, her confidence, her composed manner, was making it difficult to stick to the script. Lena finally broke the silence, her voice almost too quiet to hear. "You're not just arresting a woman. You're arresting the future." The words were cryptic, but there was a certain finality in them, like she knew exactly what Sarah was thinking, even before Sarah knew herself. Confused and unsettled, Sarah reached for her handcuffs. The motion was automatic, born of years of training, but as her fingers brushed the cold metal, she felt a flicker of doubt. Was she doing the right thing? Was she arresting a person who deserved this, or had she just made a colossal mistake? Lena didn't resist when Sarah cuffed her. She simply turned and Sarah guided her to the patrol car, her mind spinning. The arrest felt wrong, but Sarah couldn't put her finger on why. Everything was following protocol. Everything was fine, wasn't it? The quiet doubt gnawed at her, but she pushed it aside. She had a job to do, and she had done it. She couldn't back out now. Once in the back of the cruiser, Lena said nothing. Her eyes were closed, her face serene, as though this moment didn't faze her in the slightest. Sarah caught a glimpse of her through the rearview mirror and saw the faintest smile tug at the corners of Lena's lips. It wasn't a smile of triumph or defiance. It was a smile of understanding, like Lena knew exactly how this would play out. The short drive to the station was uneventful, but the tension between the two women felt almost unbearable. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she had missed something important, something crucial, but every time she tried to focus, her mind refused to settle. Lena wasn't just another person she had arrested. There was more to her, something about the way she carried herself, the quiet strength she exuded that set her apart. As Sarah pulled into the police station parking lot, her thoughts began to swirl. Who was Lena Carter? Why did her name sound so familiar? Sarah knew she had heard it before, but it didn't click right away. She parked the cruiser and got out, her hand still resting on her holstered gun as she led Lena into the station. When they walked through the door, the officers at the desk looked up, their eyes widening when they saw Lena. It was a subtle reaction, but it didn't go unnoticed by Sarah. The whispers started immediately. "Isn't that Lena Carter?" One officer murmured under his breath. The name hit Sarah like a punch to the gut, and suddenly everything fell into place. Lena Carter, the state senator. The woman she had just arrested was someone important, someone whose name commanded respect. Sarah felt her stomach twist as the realization sank in. She had just made a colossal mistake. The weight of the revelation hit Sarah like a tidal wave. Lena Carter, the state senator, the woman she had just arrested without a second thought, was someone the entire city knew. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face as the murmurs around the station grew louder. Her hands began to tremble slightly, betraying her calm exterior. As Lena was escorted to a holding cell, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled in her chest. She knew the political ramifications of this arrest could spiral out of control in ways she wasn't prepared for. She had done everything by the book, so why did it feel so wrong? Was she being unfair to Lena? Was there something more to the situation that she missed? She walked back to her desk, trying to focus on the paperwork in front of her. She had to clear her head, but the faces of her colleagues kept flashing through her mind, the whispers she had overheard earlier. It was then that she realized just how far-reaching the consequences of her actions might be. The news outlets would have a field day with this, the scandal would erupt, and suddenly, Sarah would be at the center of it all. Her phone rang, and she snapped to attention. It was her supervisor, Captain Garcia. Sarah's stomach twisted as she answered the call. "Johnson, what the hell just happened?" Garcia's voice was sharp, his tone laced with frustration. "You arrest a state senator and you don't even know who she is." Sarah hesitated, trying to steady her voice. "I didn't realize, sir. I followed procedure." She was acting strange. Strange? Garcia cut in, his voice rising. "She's a state senator. This is a political nightmare, and you've just made it worse. Get down here now. We need to discuss damage control." The call ended abruptly, leaving Sarah with a knot in her stomach. She stared at the phone for a long moment, feeling a deep sense of shame and panic. There was no denying it now. She had made a huge mistake. But what could she do? Was it too late to undo this? At that moment, Officer Martinez walked by, glancing at Sarah. "You okay?" he asked quietly, his voice laced with concern. Sarah nodded, though she didn't feel okay at all. She was drowning in uncertainty, unsure of what would come next. Lena was a prominent figure, someone whose influence reached far beyond the city limits. What would happen to her career? What would happen to Sarah's? She hadn't even considered the possibility that she could be wrong about someone she had detained. She'd never thought it was necessary to question her authority, but now, in the wake of this mistake, everything felt different. Lena, however, seemed unbothered by the entire ordeal. Sarah had expected some kind of confrontation, perhaps anger or resistance, but Lena had been calm and composed throughout the entire process. It was almost like she knew something that Sarah didn't. Was it possible that Lena was aware of the position Sarah was in? The power dynamics at play? As Sarah prepared herself for the meeting with Garcia, she couldn't shake the feeling that this arrest, this mistake, was going to change her life forever. She had tried to do the right thing, but in the process, she had unknowingly crossed a line she couldn't erase. How could she have missed it? How could she not have known who Lena Carter was? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the door opening. Lena was brought into the interrogation room, escorted by another officer. Despite everything, Lena's demeanor remained unchanged, still calm, still poised. It was as though nothing had fazed her at all. And that only made Sarah feel more guilty. Sarah walked into the interrogation room, her mind racing with questions she couldn't answer. She had expected some level of anger from Lena, or at the very least, resistance, but there was none. Instead, the senator sat in the chair, her posture straight, her eyes focused but calm, like she was waiting for Sarah to make her next move. The officers had left her alone in the room, and now it was just Sarah and Lena. The weight of the situation loomed large, and Sarah couldn't escape the feeling that she had stepped into something much bigger than herself. "Ms. Carter," Sarah began, her voice shaky despite her attempt to sound authoritative. I need to apologize. I didn't know who you were when I made the arrest." Lena's eyes didn't flicker, but her lips curled into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "It's all right, Officer Johnson," she said, her voice smooth and controlled. "You were doing your job, right? Following the rules." Sarah nodded, still not entirely sure how to proceed. The apology felt inadequate, but what else could she say? The knowledge that she had arrested someone of Lena's stature weighed heavily on her. Lena wasn't just any citizen. She was a powerful politician with ties to the state government. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a potential scandal that could ruin careers, destroy lives, and cause chaos in the city. The pressure was almost too much to bear. "I didn't mean for this to get out of hand," Sarah continued, her mind still reeling. "But you have to understand, there was something about the situation. You were acting strangely, and I thought I had to follow procedure." Lena's smile faded, replaced by a look of calm understanding. "I understand, officer. But sometimes following procedure isn't enough. Sometimes you have to consider the bigger picture." Sarah felt her throat tighten. "What do you mean?" Lena leaned forward slightly, her gaze unwavering. "You may not know it yet, but the person you've just arrested holds a lot of influence. And when you arrest someone like me, you're not just dealing with a simple law enforcement issue. You're dealing with the entire state. You're dealing with the lives of people who depend on me." Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. She knew that Lena's words were true. Every word she spoke felt like a reminder of the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just a bad arrest. This was a mistake with repercussions that could stretch far beyond the walls of the police station. "I didn't realize," Sarah admitted, her voice soft. "I should have been more careful, but I was just doing what I thought was right. I didn't have any idea who you were, Ms. Carter." Lena sighed, sitting back in her chair. "And that's the problem. Officer, you weren't thinking about the bigger picture. You were thinking about following rules, but sometimes the rules don't give you the whole story." Sarah swallowed hard, trying to process what Lena was saying. She hadn't considered the consequences of her actions beyond the moment. She hadn't thought about how her choices might affect the lives of the people around her, or how they might impact the community. Now, it was all starting to sink in, and she didn't know how to fix it. The mistake had been made, and there was no going back. Lena's voice broke the silence again, this time softer, almost as if she were speaking from a place of experience. "You'll learn, Officer Johnson. You'll learn that sometimes you have to listen. You have to think before you act, because there are always consequences." For a long moment, Sarah didn't speak. She was trapped between guilt and confusion, unable to find the right words. She had arrested a state senator. She had thought she was doing her job. But now, all she could think about was how this mistake was going to change everything. "You're right," Sarah finally said, the words feeling like a weight lifted off her chest. "I wasn't thinking. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." Lena's gaze softened, but her expression remained unreadable. "You'll find your way, officer. It's just a matter of time." As Sarah left the room to speak with her captain, the words lingered in her mind. She knew she couldn't undo the past, but she also knew that the future was still hers to shape. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: her life had just been irrevocably altered. Sarah walked out of the interrogation room, her heart heavy with uncertainty. Her mind kept replaying Lena's words, each one like an echo in her thoughts. You have to think before you act. They felt like a lesson, a warning, and yet Sarah couldn't quite grasp what Lena meant. What was the bigger picture Lena had spoken of? Was it about politics? About power? Or was there something more at play here that Sarah simply wasn't seeing? As Sarah made her way to Captain Garcia's office, the air around her felt thick with tension. Her footsteps were the only sound in the corridor, a reminder of how isolated she felt. She had never been the type of officer to second-guess herself, to doubt her instincts. She had always prided herself on her ability to make quick decisions, to follow the rules and the training she had received. But now, every rule, every instinct, seemed to have failed her. When Sarah opened the door to Garcia's office, he was sitting behind his desk, his arms folded across his chest. His expression was stern, but his eyes held a trace of something else. Disappointment, maybe, or perhaps frustration. Either way, Sarah could feel the heat of his gaze, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. "Close the door, Johnson," Garcia said, his voice sharp. Sarah did as she was told, her hands still trembling slightly as she took a seat across from him. She avoided his gaze for a moment, unsure of what to say. She had made a mistake. There was no denying that. But the magnitude of it hadn't fully sunk in until now. Now that she was here, face to face with her captain, the reality of the situation hit harder than before. "You realize what you've done, right?" Garcia's voice cut through the silence. "This isn't just some routine stop. You arrested a state senator. State senator asterisk. Do you understand what kind of firestorm this is going to cause?" "I didn't know who she was, sir," Sarah said, her voice steady, though her insides churned. "I swear I was just following procedure. She acted strangely, and I thought I needed to take action." Garcia shook his head, his frustration palpable. "You should have done your research. You should have known better. This isn't just some random citizen. This is Lena Carter, a woman with political connections that span the state. A woman who has influence in ways you can't even imagine." Sarah remained silent, her mind still reeling. Lena Carter. The name echoed in her thoughts like a thunderclap. Now that she knew who Lena was, it was impossible to ignore the weight of the mistake she had made. "What's done is done," Garcia continued, his voice softening a little, though his tone remained stern. "But you need to understand the consequences here. The media is going to be all over this. The mayor is going to have to issue a public statement, and you'll be at the center of it all. People are going to scrutinize everything about you, from your background to your decisions. This isn't just about an arrest anymore. This is about your career." Sarah felt the gravity of his words settle over her, a sinking feeling in her stomach. She had always prided herself on doing her job well, on following the rules, and now that seemed like it might all unravel. She could already picture the headlines: "Police officer arrests state senator in bizarre incident," or worse. Her reputation, her career, it all felt like it was hanging by a thread. "I didn't mean for this to happen," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know she was a senator." Garcia nodded slowly. "I know you didn't, Johnson, but the fact remains that you didn't take the time to figure it out. You let your instincts take over, and now we're all paying the price for it." There was a long pause, and Sarah could feel the weight of her captain's disappointment. She had failed him, and more than that, she had failed herself. "I want you to take the rest of the night off," Garcia said finally, his tone softening just a touch. "Get some rest. Tomorrow, we'll figure out how to handle this mess. But right now, you need to clear your head. You've been rattled, and it's showing." Sarah nodded, feeling the exhaustion settle into her bones. She stood up and left the office, the weight of her actions following her every step. She had been so focused on doing her job, on enforcing the law, that she had missed the bigger picture. But now it was too late to turn back. What could she do to fix it? Could anything be done to repair the damage she had caused? As Sarah stepped into the parking lot, her mind still swirling with confusion, she couldn't help but think of Lena again. the calm in her eyes, the cryptic words she had spoken. She wondered if Lena had expected this to happen all along, if she had known that Sarah would eventually understand the larger game at play. The weight of the situation grew heavier with each passing moment, and Sarah knew one thing for certain. Her life was about to change in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. Sarah sat in her car, staring at the dashboard as the weight of the night pressed heavily on her shoulders. The parking lot was almost empty now, the hum of the city distant and muffled. The chaos of the day still lingered in her mind, replaying over and over like a broken record. She had arrested Lena Carter, a state senator, a woman with political influence, connections, and power. And now her life seemed to be spiraling out of control. The fear, the guilt, the uncertainty, it all mixed together in a swirling storm. The worst part was, Sarah still couldn't quite shake the feeling that she had missed something crucial, something important in the moments leading up to the arrest. Lena's calm demeanor, her cryptic words, the way the officers at the station had reacted when they realized who she was, it all felt like pieces of a puzzle Sarah couldn't quite solve. She sighed and reached for her phone, typing a quick message to her mother, something about being home late, just to keep up appearances. She didn't feel like talking to anyone, not yet, at least. Not until she figured out how to process all of this. But her mind kept circling back to Lena. What did Lena mean when she said, "You have to think before you act"? Sarah had done everything by the book, followed every procedure. So why did it feel like the rules themselves had betrayed her? Maybe Lena had seen something in her that Sarah herself couldn't recognize. Maybe there was a larger game being played, one where Sarah's role was insignificant in the grand scheme of things. As Sarah pulled out of the parking lot and drove toward her apartment, the dark streets stretched out ahead of her. The city felt different now, distant, almost alien. She wasn't just a cop anymore. She was a part of something bigger, something she didn't fully understand. And that terrified her. When she got home, the silence of her apartment was almost oppressive. It felt like a reflection of the uncertainty swirling in her mind. She dropped her keys on the counter and sank into the couch, staring at the ceiling. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a news alert. Asterisk State Senator Lena Carter arrested in controversial incident with local police asterisk. The headline hit her like a punch to the gut. There was a picture of Lena, calm, composed, her hands behind her back as she was escorted into the station. The words beneath the photo were damning. Asterisk details surrounding the arrest remain unclear, but sources say Carter was detained for questioning after a routine traffic stop escalated asterisk. Sarah quickly turned off her phone, unable to read anymore. She could already feel the weight of the world on her shoulders, the judgment of the public, the scrutiny that was about to come. She didn't want to be a part of that media circus. She didn't want to be a headline. But no matter how she tried to push it away, the reality of the situation was inescapable. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. She hadn't been expecting anyone. Slowly, she stood up and walked over, peering through the peephole. It was Officer Martinez. Surprised, she opened the door. "Martinez? What's going on?" He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, his expression serious. "I know you're going through a lot right now, but we need to talk." Sarah frowned. About what? Martinez hesitated, glancing over at his shoulder before stepping closer. About Lena Carter. "I've been hearing some things, Sarah. Things I think you need to know." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "What kind of things?" "Something's not right," Martinez said, lowering his voice. "I've been hearing rumors, things from the higher-ups. They're worried that there's more to this than just a routine traffic stop. There's talk that Lena might be involved in something bigger, something political." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "Bigger? What do you mean?" Martinez took a deep breath, his eyes scanning the room as if checking for eavesdroppers. "I don't know all the details, but there's word that Lena is connected to something that goes beyond the city. Something that's tied to the state government. People in positions of power are getting nervous. There's speculation that your arrest could be part of something much larger." The words hung in the air, thick with implications. Something about this didn't sit right with Sarah. She had thought this whole mess was just a A simple error on her part. But now it seemed like there was more to it. Something was going on behind the scenes, and she was caught in the middle of it. "What are you saying?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm saying you need to be careful," Martinez replied. "This isn't just about you anymore. There are forces at play here that you don't understand, and if you're not careful, you might find yourself in over your head." The gravity of his words hit Sarah like a brick. She thought she was just doing her job, but now it felt like she was part of something far more dangerous than she ever imagined. What had she gotten herself into? Martinez turned to leave, but paused at the door. "I just wanted you to know. Be smart, Sarah. You're going to need all your wits about you from here on out." With that, he was gone, leaving Sarah alone with the chilling realization that this was far from over. The hours felt like days as Sarah sat alone in her apartment, processing everything that had transpired. The weight of the arrest, the media frenzy, and the unsettling conversation with Officer Martinez hung heavily over her. She had always been a person who trusted in the clarity of procedure, in following the rules to the letter. But now, as she sat in the silence of her apartment, she realized how much of her world had been turned upside down. This wasn't just a simple mistake anymore. It was a political powder keg, and she had just lit the fuse. The thought of Lena Carter, the calm senator who seemed to know something Sarah didn't, stuck with her. Lena's words echoed in her mind. Asterisk, you have to think before you act. You weren't thinking about the bigger picture. Asterisk, Sarah had thought she was doing the right thing, that she was keeping control of a situation that seemed off, but now she felt like a pawn in someone else's game. Was this all part of a larger strategy? Was Lena playing some sort of role she couldn't see? The following morning, the storm of public attention had only intensified. Sarah couldn't even check the news without seeing the flashing headlines. Lena Carter's arrest was now a full-blown scandal, and every outlet was speculating on the details. Asterisk, was it a politically motivated arrest? Was Sarah part of a conspiracy to take down a powerful public figure? Asterisk. Her phone rang incessantly, calls from friends, colleagues, and even strangers. But there was one call Sarah hadn't expected. It was from Lena. Sarah hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello." "Officer Johnson." Lena's voice was smooth, controlled, but there was an underlying tone of something deeper, something Sarah couldn't quite place. "I think we need to talk." Sarah was taken aback. After everything, she wasn't sure if Lena would want to speak with her again, but she had no choice but to listen. "Are you okay?" Lena asked, her voice almost gentler than Sarah expected. "I'm not sure what you've been hearing, but I wanted to reach out." "I don't know what's going on anymore," Sarah confessed, her voice wavering. "I thought I was doing my job, but everything's spinning out of control." "I know," Lena said, "and I understand why. This has become more than just an arrest, hasn't it?" Sarah nodded even though Lena couldn't see her. She felt overwhelmed, trapped in a situation that was far beyond her understanding. "Yes, I didn't know who you were, Lena. I didn't realize what I was walking into. I never meant for it to get this bad." There was a pause on the other end. Sarah could almost hear Lena thinking. "I know you didn't," Lena finally replied. "You were just doing your job, but now we're both in a position we can't get out of easily. You need to understand that this arrest wasn't random. It was a spark, and it's already ignited something much bigger. There are forces at play that neither of us can control." Sarah's heart raced. "What does that mean? What are you saying?" Lena's tone shifted, becoming more serious, even urgent. "I don't want to get into specifics over the phone, but I'm telling you this because you need to be prepared. Your role in this is not going to go away anytime soon. People who are in power, they'll make sure you're held accountable one way or another." "What do I do?" Sarah's voice cracked, the weight of her predicament finally crashing down on her fully. "What do you want from me?" Lena paused, and Sarah could hear the soft hum of a background noise, like she was somewhere busy, but Lena's voice remained clear. "I need you to be smart. There are decisions you'll have to make, things you'll have to choose between. You're at a crossroads right now, Sarah. The question is whether you'll let them dictate your future or if you'll take control of your own path." Sarah's mind spun with confusion, trying to grasp what Lena was suggesting. She felt the pressure of the moment. It wasn't just about the arrest anymore. It wasn't just about her. It was about something much larger than her own actions, her own career. "I'm not sure I understand," Sarah said, her voice filled with uncertainty. Lena's tone softened again. "You will, in time. I'll be in touch soon, officer. Just remember, the game isn't always as simple as it seems. Trust your instincts from here on out. And remember, sometimes the biggest battles are fought quietly, out of the public eye." Before Sarah could respond, the line went dead. For a moment, Sarah just stood there, the phone still pressed to her ear as she tried to make sense of everything. What had she just heard? What was Lena involved in? And why was she now asking Sarah to trust her? She didn't have all the answers, but one thing was clear: this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The storm had only just begun, and now Sarah was caught in its eye.